All right, we on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Hey, folks. I see a few people in here kicking things off. Andy, Art, Susanna. Hello all. I'm gonna give it a few more minutes to see if anyone else shows up a little bit late, and then we can jump in. Might just double check and see if my sharing works. So bear with me for 2 seconds, guys. Yeah, seeing that, yeah, getting some thumbs up. All right, cool. Well, in that case, maybe we get started. Everyone else can join in the future. I will say I can't see the chat when I share my screen, Liv, so you'll have to give me a wave. Cool. All right. Howdy, everyone. Welcome to How to Run a Successful Webinar for First Timers. I am Dom, for those of you who don't know me. Head of digital strategy here at Neighbourhood, sort of a long-term neighbour. I've been here 3 years, close to 3 years, maybe a little over 3 years, hard to say really. And I've also done a couple of other webinars with Neighbourhood, building stronger client relationships with smart content, our first webinar, I think, and then how to boost conversions with effective landing pages, which is a recent one. Also with me here today, we have Liv, who is manning the chat. She'll be around if you have any questions or I think she'll probably throw out some polls and some questions herself at some point, so keep an eye out for that. And before we get too stuck into it, we have a little something for you at the end. So stick around, and we'll pass on some of our best practices and some tips and tricks, but only if you stick around for the full webinar. And that one's going to be an exclusive just for you guys. Can't get that any other way. So congrats. And then I think we'll jump into it, get straight to the core of it. So wanted to start off in the obvious place of what is a webinar really. This is. All right, next question. Why webinars? No, I can probably put a little bit more detail around that. What is a webinar? So there's a few things I think that make a webinar something of its own and something important. The main one for me, I think, is that it's an opportunity for dialogue. Marketing in general tends to be one-directional. You're speaking to people. Inbound makes a big deal about it being a conversation. Generally, when you're marketing, when your customers, your leads respond, then it becomes a sales thing. So marketing is one way, sales is two-way. I think that webinars are sort of the one place where marketing gets two ways, because people can respond in real time. They can ask questions, all that sort of stuff. And it's otherwise that sort of emails back and forth doesn't really count. So I think that it's as an opportunity for dialogue is quite important. It's also a way to convey complex ideas in an easily understood way. That's something I'll bring up a few times in this presentation. The idea that webinars make it very easy to explain some difficult ideas, some things that might take, that a normal video or a blog or something can't really cover, especially things that require or generate questions or discussion from people. That's a big part of it as well, I think. So being able to convey that sort of stuff, I think, happens a lot easier in a webinar. It's also a lead gen tool disguised as content. So obviously, to get onto a webinar, you sign up, you give some details. The value of a webinar is very high when you look at something like a blog, which is pretty low stakes from a value point of view, depending on the blog, obviously. A webinar is a lot higher value, so you're going to get a lot stronger lead gen from it. So It's a great lead gen tool, but it is also content. It's both, walks both sides of that coin. So yeah, 2 for 1. It's a way of proving that you know what you're on about. It's very important to be a thought leader, to use a pretty markety word, a thought leader. It's important that you're an authority on topics. It's one of the major ways that you can differentiate yourself from your competitors. And one of the most important things from Google's perspective is being an authority and being the most knowledgeable one in the room. Webinars are a great way to do that. Webinars are a good opportunity for you to be able to speak about something that you know. Oopsies. Sorry, can you guys still see my presentation as was? All right, cool. Yeah, so it's a way of proving that you know what you're on about. It's very important to be an authority. Webinars are a good way to show that you can walk the walk and talk the talk, to show that you know what you're talking about, to show that you are an expert in something. That's what all of ours try and do. We try and show that we are experts in the things we talk about. Hopefully this will show you how I'm an expert in webinars. We'll see. You let me know at the end. And then finally, it's this mouse is going to do my head in, sorry. It's a way of building rapport with your community. So for us, things like tone of voice and having a personality is very important. Very easy to do in a webinar, both through the visuals, the slides that you can see, the way that we speak, all of that sort of stuff goes into it. Whereas things like blogs, videos, all of that, a little bit harder to convey an everyday personality because there's no feedback, there's no like one-to-one discussion. So webinars are a great way to do that. Why webinars though? So that's sort of what makes a webinar and what the value is, but why should you be interested in them? First and foremost, COVID is a pretty big one. Right now, people have been looking for an alternative to meeting in person, to doing face-to-face, looking for different ways to keep people engaged when the world ends around them. Webinars are a good way to do that. Webinars are a good way to get some face time with your clients, customers, whoever you want to be speaking to. And it's a good alternative to having those sorts of face-to-face discussions and things like that. They're engaging, so there's a lot of things that we can do that are a bit one-sided. Things like I mentioned blogs, things like videos on YouTube, all that sort of stuff. Those are all a little bit one-sided. Webinars less so. They help you generate leads, as we mentioned. It's a great generation tool. So if you're looking to build a list, it's a good way to start, or a good way to manage a list, which leads me into qualifying them. It's very easy to say everyone who's looked at a webinar has reached a certain level of qualification. So you can use them as a way, like a gateway to the back end of your buyer's journey, or anything like that, and use it as a way to give people content, good to teach people something they need to know before they can become a customer. They're also an opportunity to prove your expertise, build authority. I mentioned that on the last one. It's a good way to look like an expert, a good way to look like you know what you're talking about, or to prove you know what you're talking about. It's probably a better way to phrase that. So they also allow to explore deeper, more complex content, which we've mentioned. They allow the audience to ask questions and better understand a topic. That sort of ties into the complexity of it. It's easy to make a video that explains something, but people, if they have a question about that thing, aren't going to invest and engage as heavily. They're gonna have to go somewhere else to find an answer to it. A webinar means that they can ask questions and get as skilled and knowledgeable as they need to be in the moment. And you can stay on the webinar until they know everything they need to know. If you need, you can sort of say, I'm just gonna sit here until you know everything you need to know. You just let me know when that is. It provides your business with evergreen content. So as I mentioned before, it's content and it's a lead generational tool. Webinar content tends not to go out of style unless there's something major that changes after you've recorded it. But by and large, the content you put in a webinar is long-term. The training you're doing or the education you're providing, that's something you can just put on the site. We make our webinars on demand, as you will experience after this. So you can go back and watch it again in the future. You can share it with other people. You can use it again for a future campaign, anything like that. And finally, they're an opportunity for revenue. So if you want to charge for your webinars, some of them are definitely worth it. Some of them are definitely that level of complex and that level of engaged that people will pay for it. So if that's something that you're interested in, then it's a great way to make some revenue. I don't know if there's anyone that does that exclusively, but I think I could imagine it being a major source of revenue for someone if that's how that was your product, was webinars. So for those of you who know about the buyer's journey, let's say, let's get a bit of engagement happening. Throw in the chat, where do you reckon webinars sit in the buyer's journey? Where do they make the most sense between awareness, consideration, decision? Quick reminder, awareness being when people want to learn about a problem, consideration being when they want to learn about how to solve a problem, and decision when they want to learn about what product best solves the problem. Oh, Olivia doing some closed captioning for me in the chat. Appreciate it. Amelia, awareness and consideration. Susanna, consideration. Honestly guessing, nice. The best kind of guessing. All right, votes in. Well, I'm going to be honest, it's all of them. So technically everyone's correct. Congrats. Webinars can go anywhere. They can do anything. I would say they definitely make the most sense consideration decision. So you're not wrong on that one, guys, but there's no reason you can't have some awareness ones. And we'll jump into how best to encapsulate that in this next section, but they're super useful all the way through. Whenever you think about them being a way to move someone from one stage to the next, super valuable. Just a little bit more on why they're a good idea. So 73% of marketing executives recommend webinars for lead gen. It's a very, very, very popular way to generate leads is webinars, especially when you look at, if we go look at that buyer's journey again, lead generation is an awareness thing. That happens all the way down at the beginning. You wouldn't be generating leads in the consideration decision stage, but that's what most people use it for, is awareness stage stuff of generating leads. Similarly, 58% of marketers use webinars as a promotional tool to promote their business or to promote their clients' businesses. So as a form of marketing and advertising, also very, very popular. I will say both of these figures came from GoToWebinar, a presentation of theirs though. So maybe take it with a little grain of salt, but I'm sure they know what they're talking about. So that's why you want to use webinars, and that's what a webinar is. But who are they for? Can anyone do a webinar? And more importantly, should they? So when's a webinar a good call? When you have a specialized or unique hot take on a topic. What I mean by that is if you want to do a webinar on something that is pretty well known and pretty popular, and your opinion of it is the same as everyone else's, it doesn't really make for great content. You're sort of just agreeing with everyone else. You're not providing a ton of value. Webinars make the most sense if you have specialized knowledge. So you have something that you think other people don't know that you can share with them. This I would consider specialized knowledge. We do a lot of webinars in the office. We have a lot more experience than someone who is dabbling or hasn't given it a try before or has only done a couple. So that's sort of what I'm pulling from here. Or if you have a unique hot take, if you have sort of a unique point of view or an alternative to what everyone else is saying, that also makes for a good webinar. You can sell your position and then defend it if people question it. It's also a good idea when you have topics that are complex or subjective enough to require questions. So as I mentioned, webinars benefit from a complex topic that people want to talk about and have questions about and want to discuss. If you have a universally appropriate topic or one that has enough interest to justify it, so a webinar that only 2 people in Australia relate to is not a great call. A webinar that everyone in Australia relates to is a much better call. So try and consider things that you're gonna have enough interest out there, they're not too niche, to justify an audience, because speaking to an empty webinar room, I speak from experience, is not the most fulfilling. Glad to see there's some folks in here today. It helps the self-esteem a lot. Thanks, guys. When else is a webinar a good call? When a topic provides values to attendees beyond just being a sales pitch. There's no reason it can't just be how you sell your product as a look at just showing the benefits and whatnot. But people want some value out of it. They want to get something out of the process. So we'll go into different types of webinar next. But I personally think that the best webinars are ones that provide value outside of just selling. So as I mentioned, the many and varied flavors of the webinar. Educational. So educational is kind of what I think this one would fall into. Educational webinars, the goal is to teach, the goal is to inform. They're data-based and they're generally pretty one-sided. It's pretty much always someone explaining to a group of people how something works, or just educating them in some way. In this case, for an educational webinar, the presenter needs to be especially knowledgeable. These ones are good for monetization. So these ones are good where you have restrictive knowledge that not everyone knows that you can then sell and say, if you want to learn this too, here's where you pay. Product or service demos. This was the other one I was mentioning before. If you have something like you want to show them how something works. SaaS software uses this a lot. I see if they want to show you how the platform functions, then they'll do a product or service demo as a webinar. Benefits of it being a webinar as opposed to just sort of like a one-on-one or a big conference call or anything is that you can run it a lot easier from the presenter's point of view, show them what you need to show them without being interrupted or anything like that. You can also go through features and you can have a lot of people there all at once. So you can have all the people who are interested in the product there come to the same session, get the same value and get the same experience. Onboarding and training, sort of one that's more so internal, but not always. So if you want to use it as a way to train up someone on how you do something, on processes, anything like that, or if you want to onboard them into how something works, webinars can be a good call. Main benefit there is the same. It's that people get a consistent experience. You could just do videos and then you know that it's exactly the same, but the benefit of the webinar in almost all of these cases is that people get to ask questions. So in onboarding and training, if people want to ask questions about how best to, why they're doing training or anything like that, webinars are a good call. How to, very similar to educational, but they are more in depth about a process. So this is how you do something. This is how we do something. This webinar we're in right now would also classify someone as a how-to because it will get to the how-to webinar stage a little bit later on. I think it still generally comes under that education banner, but there's a how-to value in there as well. How-tos are a good way to bring in the leads. As I mentioned before, education's good for things like monetization. How-tos are good for just bringing in leads because a lot of people who want to know how to do something, and webinars are a really good way of conveying that information and also allowing them to, again, ask questions and get clarification when needed. QA and discussion. By the way, if ever you're looking for GIFs and you can't find one, just search for The Simpsons because they have apparently got a GIF for literally every emotion. Little thing I learned while putting this together. QA and discussion. Webinars can function as like conference calls or something like that, where it's a bit of a roundtable and you can sort of get some questions, answer a bunch of questions, you can facilitate discussion, things like that. It has a benefit over something like a conference call for the same reason that the onboarding and training would, where it's only one person speaking, it's not everyone interrupting each other and trying to speak. So you have like a moderator. They can also, I think that questions and answers should be an integral part of every webinar. I've broken it out into its own thing for people who want to do a webinar where that's the whole point. Come to a webinar, ask any questions you might have, let's have a chat. But I think every webinar, all of these types should incorporate some questions and answers because it's one of the major benefits of webinars is the ability for people to ask questions. Speaking of which, hit me up if you have any questions. Discussions can be held to gather feedback or to understand problems, things like that. So think of it as like almost a customer service tool. You could do things like if you have some past customers or people who've been through the process, have a webinar just to check in with them, see how things have gone, see if they have any concerns that can be addressed, stuff like that. Not just on the front end, but also post purchase too. So I mentioned before that they kind of happen all throughout this process. This is kind of an example. So things like education happen down in the awareness stage. Your how-tos and your Q&As are more so consideration. And then you got things like product service demos, training and onboarding and stuff in the decision stage. So can do anything and be anything. So that's sort of why and how. And then we'll jump into how to do it yourself. So setting up your own webinar. I think this is the meat and potatoes for most of you. I have my process for setting up a webinar, and it's basically to ask where, what, why, who, when, how. The DOM WWWWH method. You might want to work on the acronym yourselves, but that's how Dom does it. When it comes to what, start with what the idea is. So look for some highly specific content. Don't make it too vague or open-ended. You want to try and teach people something specific. You want to pick something fairly niche, not too niches to affect the audience size, but niche enough where you can be very, very specific in the information you're giving and really come across as that authority. If you try and go too broad, very easy to just sound like everyone else. Look for a question people are asking. So whether or not it's something based on search results, like your Google performance or something like that, we like to farm questions we receive in person from our clients. Things that our clients are struggling with make for great webinar fodder. So we'll listen to the things that people are looking for, and that's what we'll use to write new topics. Find something you have a specialized knowledge in. So as I mentioned before, speak from things you know. It's unwise to pick a topic you don't know anything about and then hold a webinar on it, because there's always a chance that someone in the comments will know more than you, and it's going to get very awkward very quickly. If you do know more than me about webinars, feel free to speak up. Something that you consider valuable enough to attract leads. So obviously the value of the information you're providing needs to justify the webinar, needs to justify people's times. It's a much bigger investment for a person to come to a webinar than to just save a video on YouTube and watch it when they're free. You're asking them to take time out of their day to come to the webinar, and you want to make sure that the value of it is there for them. So just make sure that whatever you want to talk about is valuable and is something that people are going to be willing to give up some time to come to. Once you sort of have an idea in your head, sort of run it through a few questions just to make sure it qualifies as a good idea. So is there a purpose? Is there a reason people are going to watch it? Is it going to help them in some way effectively? Is it complex? Is it something that can't just be put in a blog or on YouTube as a regular video? Are you going to get some benefits out of the webinar nature? And then are there potential questions? So is it the sort of topic that you can see people asking questions about or struggling with, or something along those lines? Then we move into why. What is the goal of the webinar? So every webinar should have a purpose, whether or not it's leads, education, to get them into a meeting or something like that. An example would be for this webinar, for you guys, our goal is to educate you on webinars and hope that it leads into you seeing us as people who know what they're talking about when it comes to marketing and webinars. So that's sort of the goal that we came into this webinar with. Consider what sort of goal you want to achieve with your webinar. If it's something physical, if you want them to download something or buy something, then that's going to affect your CTAs in the webinar. It's going to affect how you write it. It's going to affect what happens after the webinar, all of that sort of stuff. So it's really important to have that goal in your head from the very beginning. Once you know the goal, you can start thinking about the people. So there's two sorts of sides to this. There's the person in front of the camera, and then there's you guys who are watching it. In terms of the speaker, do you have someone who's skilled and highly knowledgeable on the topic? If it's someone on the team, great. Find someone who's in the office that can speak to it with a level of confidence and can field questions that might come out of the ether at them, anything like that. Do you need to find someone who's an expert in the topic? There's a lot of people who get like guest experts to come in, and it kind of turns into a bit of an interview type style where you can do a question and answer with a person. Or do you need to study up? Do you need to get knowledgeable in the topic before you can do a webinar on it? If people are asking a question a lot, maybe it's worth investing the time to become an expert and then have a webinar on it. Same question, do they understand the concept well enough to field questions? It's very important that they're comfortable enough to do that. Are they charismatic and a good public speaker? To be frank, don't consider myself a particularly good public speaker, but I think that it's important that you're able to sit there and convey your ideas in a clear way. Hopefully you're a little bit charismatic too. Let me know if that's the case, so that people respond well to it, and you can build on that tone of voice and the personality of the brand and all that sort of stuff. Then finally, do you have an offsider to help manage the webinar? So as I mentioned, Liv's technical assistant today, having someone who can be in the room, who can answer the questions as they pop up in chat. They can call out attention if someone doesn't know what's happening. They can pass on links or run polls, all that sort of stuff. Takes a lot of the pressure off you. It means that you guys don't have to sit there as I silently try and work out how to do something. And then they can help you with that. From the audience point of view, consider what persona you're aiming the webinar at. So for those of you who are across personas, you know that everything you do should be aimed at one of your personas. For those of you who aren't across buyer personas, persona, check out our recent webinar on buyer personas, which I'm sure Liv could probably pop in the chat if I put her on the spot. The buyer persona is effectively, you're just picking out a subset of your audience, a segment of your audience. They should be who you consider every single part of the content piece. How would that person want to hear it? What sort of challenges does that person have? What sort of questions would that person ask? And that's how you build the webinar. I mentioned starting with the idea. If I'm honest, this is probably where you really start. You think about your buyer persona, and then you think about what sort of things they need to know. So I can see you starting with who and then going to what, but that kind of ruins my www system. So I think that making sure that your idea is based in something important is the most important part. What is their level of knowledge going in? So consider what stage they're at before the webinar. What sort of things that you need to teach them? Do you need to start by dumbing things down just a little bit so that you don't sound like you're talking about things that they don't understand? And then consider where they need to be when you come out. What do you want to teach them throughout the course of your webinar? And what level of knowledge do you want them to leave with? That's just an important part of making sure it's written in a way that is very accessible. What actions do you want the attendees to take after the webinar? So it's a good question, Liv. Are you trying to send people out of my webinar? Apparently not. What actions do you want the attendees to take after the webinar? So we'll get to it a little later on, but there should always be some follow-up to your webinar. Don't ever just leave it hanging. Once the video ends, send some emails, check in with them, get some feedback, all that sort of stuff. That's going to be affected by who your audience is. So what sort of follow-up do you think they want? What sort of follow-up do they need, and how should it be written? All of that comes from considering who the audience is. Finally, take note of whether or not you need to consider things like time zones. Even less severe than a time zone, what's a convenient time for your audience? You don't want to run it at a time where, if you have a lot of business people in your audience who are going to be working 9 to 5, consider when in that 9 to 5 period makes the most sense. You probably don't want to do it in weekends, probably don't want to do it too close to getting to work or leaving work, don't want to do it too close to lunchtime. Just put some thought into what makes the most sense from your audience's point of view. It's not necessarily always what makes the most sense of you from the person who's conducting the webinar. Next is where are you going to host your webinar? So the main sort of question there is, what service, if any service, are you going to use? We have trialed a bunch. We're in Demio today, which I'm sure you'd have seen in the emails and whatnot, but there are also, we've done Livestorm, we've done 23. I've got some experience with GoToWebinar as well. There's some others. If you guys have any other webinar softwares that I haven't put on my list that you think is a good time, throw it in the chat, because that would be valuable to people for sure. There isn't one correct answer. As I said, we've used 3. Of my 3 webinars, I'm pretty sure each one was in a different system. So we've been around the bend a little bit on that one. There are certain things that you should look out for, which we'll jump into on the next slide, but by and large, it's sort of just whatever fits, whatever makes the most sense for you. You'll have to do some research, do a trial in a couple, run some test webinars, see what makes sense for you. An example of that, as I mentioned, we like Demio. We're using Demio right now. It's not perfect. We don't have a native integration to HubSpot, which is our CRM, but the rest of it is good enough to justify that. So just find whatever works best. I recommend avoiding things like Zoom. Zoom isn't a webinar software. Zoom's a video conferencing software. There's certain pros and cons to that. I think that when it's not something that's been built for webinars, it lacks a few of the main important tools and features that you'd want. Can't do things like run polls and pass on documents as easily. It doesn't have as good of a reporting on things like registrations versus attendees, all of that sort of stuff. I know that they have some, it's just not to the same level. So I would say if you want to take webinars seriously, look into a serious webinar software. Also consider your physical setting. What is around? Is it a professional background? Is there passive noise? Do you have like office pets that are going mental in the background that are going to make it annoying for everyone? Just consider the space and the production quality, because that's important to it being a good experience for your attendees. So I mentioned there being certain features that you should look out for with webinar software. If I break it down into two categories of the obvious stuff and the less obvious stuff, the obvious stuff is things like you need to be able to screen share, for example, share a presentation. I know that Demio lets you upload a presentation or share a screen. You've got some options. You want a live chat, obviously, so people can ask questions. Customizable branding, so you can make it look in line with your brand and make everything seem a bit more consistent. Oh, excuse me. You want it to be able to record the webinar so that you can use it in the future after the fact as content. A built-in attendee CRM is super helpful. So you can track things like registrations, and you can track things like people who attend and don't attend and attend multiple and all that sort of stuff. And then similarly, analytics, so that you can see how you're doing over time. Less obvious stuff, interactive elements like some of the ones that you've seen Liv use today so far, polls, etc. You can send files, you can send links to other stuff. Private messaging, so should someone ask a question, you want to be able to hit them back in private. You don't need to share everything with everyone. Waiting room pre-roll, for those of you who arrived a little bit early, hopefully you saw a little bit of our pre-roll. So you're not just sitting staring at a blank screen waiting for it to start, because as I mentioned, time is valuable. People don't want to waste time that they could be spending doing something else. So make sure that every minute you get from someone is justified. CRM integrations, as I mentioned, we use, well, I'd be shocked if anyone was surprised to hear we use HubSpot, but HubSpot for us is a big part of how we do our work. So being able to integrate into that was super, super valuable. As I mentioned, that's one thing that Demio doesn't do naturally, but we can do it through Zapier, so it was fine. That was just one of the things that we considered when we were looking at our options. Payment gateways. If a payment gateway is important for paid webinars, then that's something that you should consider up in the beginning. You can always just use an external gateway, but it helps if it's built in, of course. And then being able to share CTAs documents, as I mentioned. Susanna, you've had some success with Zoom with the webinar add-on. That's cool. I honestly don't know if I've experimented with the add-on. I just know that I had some people who wanted to use Zoom in its natural form for webinars, and it was just a bit of a trial, to say the least. Yeah, $60. Sometimes they'll charge you through the nose. So once you've worked out where you want to do it, you start thinking about when. And I'm sort of packaging a few things into when. First is literally what time. So consider when in the week. I mentioned before, your audience should play a part in deciding when you do it. GoToWebinar believes that Tuesday mornings at 11 a.m. are about as good as it gets in terms of timing. That said, it's a pretty common knowledge now. So if everyone's doing webinars at Tuesday at 11 a.m., maybe you want to pick a different time just to be different and to avoid clashing. But that's where they recommend that it happens. Most registrations and the most attendees both happen Tuesday morning. Setting up reminders is a hugely important part. You'd have got some reminders for this webinar, I hope. We send a bunch. I think there's one, definitely one a day out and one an hour out. I think sometimes we have one even longer depending on when you sign up. Very important to just keep on people's minds. I know how easy it is to hit yes attending and then completely blank on it for both webinars and general life events. So something worth doing is reminding people. How are you going to promote it? So setting up a dedicated landing page or registration page is very helpful. A lot of these softwares will give you the ability to do up a registration page internally, or they'll just automatically create one. They're not always the most optimized pages. If you can do one yourself, it's often a lot better. We've experimented with doing our own versus doing the ones generated by the system. We find that if you can do it yourself, it's worth putting the time in. If you want some guidance on how to set up a landing page for conversions, I know we have a webinar on that as well. See how hot Liv is on the link on that one. But that's something to consider, is that you can build it to optimize your chances for getting conversions there. So that's something worth looking at. Make sure you hit all the social media channels. Obviously, that's just a base level sort of thing that you should be doing, making sure that you tell everyone that it's happening, let them know when it starts, and then remind everyone once it's come and gone that they can get it on demand if they're interested. And then email marketing is considered the most effective. And I do have some numbers on that. So 45% of people, this is all according to the same GoToWebinar strategy document. 45% of webinar promotion happens via email. It's just you have a dedicated audience of engaged leads. Hopefully they're engaged and hopefully they're dedicated, but you have a list of people who have shown an interest. That's where you're going to get a lot of people who you can bring to the webinar from, as opposed to people who are just out in the world who haven't showed any sort of engagement so far. I also mentioned making sure you have reminders at different times. So they found that 15% of attendees book more than 2 weeks in advance. Not a huge amount, but it is a significant, like a number of people, 15%. 33% hit it within 24 hours. So you really can't let up on the promotion. Start a ways out and then just keep it smashing right up until the minute it starts, because you'll have stragglers all the way through. Also, reminders, obviously, remind them just before, because there's going to be a lot of people who did it weeks ago and have forgotten. And then finally, we get to how. So this is effectively putting together the webinar itself. Think about things like what kind of webinar it is. We went through the different types earlier. So each one of those types sort of has different thinking behind it. So just consider what type of webinar it is. What sort of visual elements do you need to include? Do you have like a slide deck or a presentation? We use Google Slides for most of ours to just have a consistent visual experience that we think is pretty versatile. Do you need to be able to screen share? Have you set that up? Have you tested it? Just to make sure it works as you expect it will. Imagery, do you need photos? Do you need product shots? All of that sort of stuff. And do you need any company assets, things like logos? So just keep in mind that the visual elements of the webinar are important. You want to be seen as an expert. You want to be seen as someone who knows what they're doing and is a professional. Having a good deck and a good show to put on is a big part of that. Also, remember to keep people engaged. Things like GIFs. Really hope you guys like GIFs. I may have gone a bit hard. Let me know. Polls, interactive chat elements, things like what Liv has been doing in the side there. To keep people engaged, ask a lot of questions, make sure that there isn't too much text on screen at any one time. People don't want to come to a webinar to read a book. They should be listening to you, and then the text on the screen just helps support what you're saying. That's something that they taught us back in design school once upon a time, and I think it's an important thing that a lot of people don't consider. Having 200 words in a dot point might convey a lot of information, but if you're also speaking, people can only do one. They can only listen or read, and then it just you lose the impact of both. And finally, a templated design ensures consistency. So hopefully you guys will find between this webinar and our other webinars a certain level of consistency. That helps with professionalism. It helps you come across as an authority, but it also helps you make sure your information is clear and well presented. And then we get to what happens post-webinar. So if you guys have any questions around that process, throw them in now. We are closing on the end, so start considering if you do have any other questions in general to throw them up. We'll get to questions and answers soon. And don't forget we have that little best practices sheet for you if you stick around to the end. But what happens once your webinar is over? Post-webinar nurturing. So it's really important that you don't just sort of sit back and consider your job done once the video ends. Doing that sort of lets the fire cool, and you want to strike while the iron's hot. So make sure you do something as simple as thank attendees for turning up. Always good to have people who are that engaged, so thank them for it, and you might encourage them to do it again. If people said they would attend and didn't make it, let them know, say you apologize that they couldn't make it, remind them that it'll be available on demand if it is, and how they can access that. Make sure you send more content in the same vein in a general nurturing sense. So you guys have shown an interest in webinars. I have a sneaking suspicion you'll be hearing more from us about webinars in the very near future. Ensure that attendees get first crack at the next webinar. If someone came to a webinar, there's good odds they'll come to another one if it's in a similar sort of place and concept. So always reach out to them first when the next webinar is planned out. And then obviously make the recording and slides available to everyone so that they can get something out of the process. They have something tangible from their attendance. They can also check back on it. And then if you're lucky, maybe they'll share it with someone else and you'll turn them into a new lead for the future. And then, oh, why is that? Okay, there we go. Feedback. So another part of post nurturing or post web is getting feedback. Important to try and do it as quickly as possible so that the feedback is fresh in the mind. You can say, oh yeah, no, I just walked out and it was really good and I have a lot to think about, as opposed to hitting someone a week later and they go, which webinar are you talking about? That one about webinars? All right, yeah, cool. Get that in front of them as soon as you can. Similarly, if you are able, it's a good shout to try and get the same feedback from the on-demand service. It can be easy to do when they're there live and you send out your email to your registrants and your attendees. But if you can, some services will let you do things like set up automations based on how much of something someone watches, or to do something when someone completes a video. If you do have that sort of functionality, super good to be able to say, oh, I saw that you watched our old webinar. Did you have any feedback on that? What did you think? All right. Does anyone have any questions? I will say while you reflect on that, I'll throw this up. So as promised, I have put together just a bit of a best practices set of tips that you can download and will hopefully help guide you to pulling together your webinar. You got a question, Susanna? You're not mentioning your company or your products at all in the script of your webinar? Have you thought about what the goal of your webinar is? What do you want people to do? What's the driving force behind your webinar? If it's buying products, it might be tough if you don't tell them what the product or the company is, but it's possible. But yes, while you write in there, if you head to this URL, we're not gonna send this to anyone else or make it available anywhere else. So this is going to be just something for you guys who made it to the end of this. But yeah, it's just a list of things that I think might help you when you set up your own webinar to get the most out of it. Make sure it's the best experience for your attendees and for your staff, whoever runs it. So I haven't seen any other questions. If you do have other questions, so webinar's giving them a 3-step plan they should do as a minimum to manage staff in hospitality. Cool. That's something that I think is pretty universal. I don't think you need to talk about the brand in that case. It's not going to be a super useful lead generational tool because they won't be able to associate your brand with any sort of authority or anything like that. But it's valuable knowledge. I would try and tie it to something. You want them to associate that value with someone. I should mention what we do. You should mention that it's what your company does, is provide these plans. So your products, you have a product and that's it. push it and give them a great action plan. Oh, so you don't know if you should push your product or just focus on the action plan. I think that this sort of speaks to a little bit of where is your audience at. So are they at that decision point? Are you trying to get them to close on the product? Is that the plan here? If it is, then I would say leaning into the product. You could do it sort of like this, where right now I'm offering you guys this download. It might be as simple as finishing your webinar of the great action plan by saying, that's just a slice. If you want the whole pie, get in touch, let's have a chat. Use the value of your action plan to boost them to the next stage, which is the product. You don't have to make the webinar about the product in any way, shape, or form. If you think that the action plan is a valuable enough thing for people out there, then it's a really good bouncing board to get them interested in that product. You just need to close the webinar really hard with a big sell that says, hopefully you got a lot of value out of that. I'm sure you did. If you want to see the full picture, let's have a chat. Hit me up. Here's a link. Holler at me. Then when it comes to following up with them in the emails and all that sort of stuff, do the same thing. Hope you like that webinar. Hope you got a lot of value out of it. If you want to see what the whole product can do for you, give us a bell. All right. Hopefully everyone has that URL. I think, I'm sure if you hit up Liv after this, she'll be nice enough to pass it on again. One thing I did want to say before we leave you is to keep an eye out. We have a Summer of Selling thing coming on pretty soon. We'll be announcing a little bit more about that in the very near future, I reckon. But that's something to keep an eye out for in the next few months. If you want to learn a little bit more about selling, possibly from some people who know what they're talking about in the sales game, keep an eye out, because we'll be letting people know about that very, very soon. If you want to definitely be on the list, hit us up and we'll make sure that we add you to the ever-growing Summer of Selling list that we have. All right, I think that's everything. So thanks everyone. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. Keep an ear out, and we'll talk to you later.